Hi, welcome to the Learning Lounge. My name is Sidney Shapiro, and I'm an assistant professor of business analytics at the Dillon School of Business. Today, I'm talking with my colleague, Dr. Barbara Bordalejo, about AI.
Hi, I'm Barbara Bordalejo. I work as an assistant professor at the University of ULethbridge, and I'm also co-director of the Humanities Innovation Lab.
Hi, Barbara. So I'm excited to talk to you today about AI. It's very topical, everybody's talking about it, and very controversial.
It is indeed very controversial, particularly in the Department of English where I work, because my colleagues are, concerned about the impact that AI will have on our students, on our teaching, on our research, and all these things.
What strikes me is that in the same building, you have professors from many different departments, and some think this is a boon to humanity, a panacea for their discipline, and other people think that it's going to take away their jobs. And you have people coming and saying both sides at the same time, which makes it very difficult to set AI policies across the institution because everybody's using it differently. What do you think the direction is in terms of how we teach AI or what we do with it at the university?
So we need to find ways to teach our students to use it productively, in a positive way, and not take advantage of the, let's say, lesser side or darker side of AI, that is to pretend that you did work that AI did for you. But in English particularly, we have a lot of different things that we can do with it. We can summarize articles, we can find new ideas to discuss, we can ask it what is a weakness in our own argument. So it can be very, very good, very positive. What about in computer sciences? How do you use it?
Well, I think a lot of people look at it not necessarily as producing new work, but as an autocomplete tool. And it's interesting that for many years we've had that feature in Word where you can start typing and it will figure out how to spell it or what you're typing next. And in computer science, especially in coding, you have the overall plan of what you're trying to do, and then it starts to develop pieces. What I find very concerning is that in business, a lot of people say AI is a thing, let's unplug something from our business and plug AI in and everything will work perfectly. And I think that could be a very big problem.
It will be, and it will be also when we start trying to apply for jobs and we have AI telling us who is a good candidate and who's not, because AI, of course, can recognize things that are produced by AI, solely by AI, and that is going to be an issue for our students, which is why we need to train them, particularly on these tools and how to use them properly and correctly to enhance the work that they are already doing. I was thinking recently that is similar to a graphic calculator. So I'm not very good at math because I'm a professor of English. And my daughter has a graphic calculator that I don't know how to use because I don't have the knowledge that you are required to have before you can use this machine. The same thing is happening with AI. The more knowledge you have of how it works and what you can do with it and its potential, the better use you can make of it.
So let's go back a few steps. The idea is that if there's a lot of knowledge out there, and AI is basically taking knowledge and recycling in generative AI, you could get a lot of things done like summarizing and so on, but it seems inevitable, both in business as well as in academia, that we're running into an arms race situation where if we try to detect AI, there's going to be better tools that are ultimately going to replace it. If we're trying to get jobs, then we're applying with AI, there's going to be AI detection tools or AI, and you already see this happening, especially with jobs. A package came out recently that somebody applied to 10,000 jobs in 1 hour. And of course, for that first person who did it, that's great. They got 10,000 jobs out there and they got a bunch of interviews. But for everyone else, all the companies are going to be inundated with CVs and we end up in the same place. So what do you think about this idea of like breaking out of the mold, coming up with different and not recycled ideas that are truly different? And we don't get into this arms race situation where we're just trying to compete with an algorithm, whether it's catching cheating, whether it's trying to, send in a CV or something else.
Well, I think we need to reframe the way that we see AI. So instead of seeing it as something negative that people are using to cheat, which some people might, that happens all the time, but we need to see it as a positive thing that we can use to enhance what we already are. So I was working on an article recently, and I normally would ask for feedback from another person. But before doing that, I thought, well, I'll ask ChatGPT what they think about this. I never know which pronouns to use for ChatGPT. It's very difficult. Anyway, what I said is, can you spot any weaknesses in this argument? And also, if you can think of anything that would be a counter argument to it, please let me know. That way I can revise my own text that I have written with this different point of view that someone else has. Now, regularly I would have done that using another person, but this can be done much faster. And then when I am going to give it to a colleague, their time is very valuable, right? I can give them a more finished version, something that already has been through a process of revision. And so it helps a lot, but it doesn't take away from the original thinking behind it, which is something that artificial intelligence doesn't yet do.
Right. So I suppose the biggest and most controversial question really comes down to this idea of AGI. People are worried that artificial intelligence is going to take over the world and Terminator.
Yes.
But that doesn't seem anywhere close to what we're doing. In fact, I had a graduate student recently ask me, what's the point of my education if computers can do what I can do? I'm like, clearly you actually haven't used AI to try to come up with new ideas. It doesn't do that very well. So what do you think of this idea about where we are now and what the future looks like?
That is a difficult question because, of course, as a humanist, I have read all the ominous science fiction books and watch all the films that say AI is going to realize that we are not very good people. And that's what we are afraid of when AI can see us as a plague. But it is really not even close to being anywhere there. Among other things, it really doesn't work like intelligence. So as a humanist, again, we talk a lot about definitions. What is intelligence? And one of the things that I notice about AI is it doesn't have a sense of humor. And it definitely doesn't have any consciousness of itself. So in that, it's not really close to human. Is something terrible going to happen one day? I don't think so, not with this. But there could be bad consequences that are not as terrifying maybe as Terminator films, that are misunderstandings, false information that is out there and that AI cannot distinguish, but is feeding us as if it were true. And that is really dangerous. And that's why we are needed as scholars and as academics, the universities needed, because we need to teach people how to tell what is true from what is not. And this is true about AI, but also as it's true about politics these days in many places. So I think that, yes, you could imagine a very dark future, but that is mostly things we fear and we write about it because, they are terrifying. It's not necessarily the truth, but it points towards what is it that we need to look at today in order to be better ourselves in the future.
So what do you think about this idea of learning? 2 or 3 years ago, I would have students write me an email and say, I don't understand what to do, I don't understand the text or something else. Mm-hmm. I found a very good solution to this was creating videos, and I can show them in code in a few minutes what to do, and then they understood the concept, instead of like rewriting the textbook or writing long emails. Mm-hmm. Now I have a tool that does all of it. So, I try not to automatically post responses to my students from ChatGPT, but what I found is that now that I let students use ChatGPT in some of my classes, and again, that's not the focus of the class, but it does help come up with ideas and so on, quite often they message me and say, I don't understand what ChatGPT is telling me. So clearly the learning part of the underlying knowledge, the skills that they're supposed to develop, that's the part that's missing.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit more, however. I want to ask this. How are you setting your policies for AI these days? So
I set a policy that said you could use ChatGPT as much as you like.
Okay.
And this semester, and the last semester when I used this policy, my class average was around 70. Mm-hmm. And you would have to wonder why. Like, how's it possible that the answers aren't perfect? And a lot of it comes down to the logic of why you're doing something. So imagine you have a business problem. There's both the solution part, like let's say building an app, but there's also why you're building it and does it make sense? And that part, especially if you have many different components that are worked inside a project, the context is too small to really understand all the pieces and make intelligent decisions about trade-offs of what you should do. So for example, one of my students developed an amazing app. You can sign up parents and you can sign up kids, and kids and parents can find each other and they're able to arrange for babysitters. And it's very convenient, everybody can do it. But when I looked at the app, which was technically correct and all the code was good and it totally made sense, the business case was basically a kidnapper's dream. Go in there and find parents and kids to kidnap kids. So it was not a good idea and it didn't make sense. And quite often, the business idea or the underlying logic doesn't make sense, although the product does work. And as far as the learning goes, like you really have to understand how the pieces are built together, not just see the final product. And if you don't understand why it's telling you what it's telling you, then you might go through this large iterative loop of keep on asking questions, but it keeps on going around. And I have a perfect example to illustrate this. I have a very fancy TV in my kitchen, and I found out that I can program the TV in my kitchen with my laptop. So I asked ChatGPT, how do I do this? I've never programmed a TV before, and it told me, type these commands in, log into the TV. And I did it, and we talked for 3 hours, going back and forth, trying to find out what to do. And for some reason, I was stuck in this logical loop, and I didn't really understand why or what I was doing wrong, but I did everything it told me, and nothing was moving forward. I kept on getting error messages of different types. So I took my entire conversation, like hundreds of pages, and pasted it into Google's AI engine, and it said, type in these 3 commands. I typed it in, it worked.
So some artificial intelligence is cleverer than other artificial intelligence.
I don't necessarily think it's clever, but it had those words associated in it from the beginning, and that training or those weights knew the answer from the beginning. I was just asking the wrong questions to the wrong model, right?
So I want to go back then to what you asked me.
Yeah.
That is, what do I do, for example, when my students don't understand the answers that they get? And that doesn't quite happen to us. And I tell you what, most of my students are really terrified of using artificial intelligence because plagiarism is a big no-no in English,
Right.
and it's not like programming, so it's a very, very different type of thing.
Right.
So what I have to do is to teach them what to do with it. So I have had sessions with students on, for example, how to find a topic for their essay, because I don't give topics myself. So, and I said, well, what are you interested in? Are you interested in this text? So these are the ways to ask the questions, so you can get an interesting topic for your work. So I am more still trying to get them to overcome the fear of using AI and explain to them that it's not plagiarism as long as they tell me that they used the AI and in which ways they used it. And what is it that they did? I don't want them particularly to get AI to produce the text for them, because that's the business that we are in, to teach people how to write. So if AI does it for them, it's not quite what we want. But I tell them, look, you can use it for bibliographic research. You can use it when you have an article and you're not sure that it's good for what you need. You can ask it to summarize it. So then you get a little shot of what this article is about, and you can know if you need to read it or not. You can get something else, you can ask for alternatives. So there are different ways that they can use it, but they have not been using it in the same way, because unlike programming, that has been something that people could Google before. What is the solution to this issue that I'm having, and then take code from someone else. We really need original text to be produced by the students,
right.
And it has to be coherent, and it has to have a style. But what I show them is how AI can actually produce different styles. And a very interesting project that I saw maybe a year and a half ago was a student that had used very clever prompt engineering to produce this, what he called a collaboration. I think it is a collaborative project in which he had produced these sonnets, some in Shakespearean style, and it was very interesting because the student would ask, oh, ChatGPT, please write a sonnet about the Liberal Party in Canada using Shakespearean style and language. And it was really clever. I was very mad that I didn't think of that myself, because it's a productive use of AI for creative writing. And it is. The student rightly call it a collaboration, but I think that there is the intellectual merit is from the one who had the idea. So I think the student really didn't collaborate with ChatGPT, but used it to produce something that was creative and was very clever. So we use that for creative writing. If you have a blog, you can say, well, how would you start this? And you can go from there. So there are lots of ways that humanities students can use these technologies without falling into plagiarism or cheating or anything like that.
So now I'll ask you all the controversial questions.
Sure.
Okay, so in AI models, there's predetermined weights of how things are associated with each other. In other words, there's predetermined pathways of why it chooses one over another. And although that's a black box, we really don't know what the decisions are because computers aren't powerful enough yet. It is theoretically possible to understand which it chose and why. Based on the data that's fed into these AI models and how it's trained, don't you think that these kinds of systems reinforce stereotypes, colonialism, racism, bias, because it's simply using all the data that's out there, much of which is not appropriate?
Absolutely. Of course, it will reproduce all the biases that society has. Now, those are problems in our society before they are problems in AI. So we need to address our systems, all the systemic racism, sexism, and all sorts of different kinds of oppression that we have in society before we can say, well, we want an AI that is free of it. One of the problems that we have is with the English language. So low resource languages do not have the same possibilities using AI because simply there is not enough data for the large language model. Oh, I could say that without, without tripping. Isn't that great? So you have all these low resource languages that would like to use AI but cannot in the same way. So English becomes a language of oppression for so many cultures. And of course, because it's culturally biased, it also infiltrates those places and those cultures. So there are many problems that come with AI, but are also societal and global problems that we have to address in other ways. So social justice is a big issue that we need to look into.
So let's take this one step further. I think many of our colleagues will be interested in the idea around using generative AI in research. And I'll tell you about a really recent, very interesting thing that I've seen. I'm writing a paper about it, so hopefully nobody steals this idea. But I use Atlas TI sometimes to do qualitative research. And in Atlas TI, they have an AI plugin that uses ChatGPT. So essentially, you put your interview data into it, it sends it to ChatGPT and brings you back responses. It, however, has a very long disclaimer that's like 4 pages long that says anything that's controversial or anything that they don't like or anything that's biased, they're automatically going to filter out. The reality is that much of social research does have things that we want to change the world. We have to understand what the problem is. And if we're being censored from analyzing data using AI, it seems like there's a big problem in terms of what data we could actually ask for and the results that we can get. So what do you think about this idea of AI censorship through filtering?
Well, it's a problem because it will make us think that issues are not there, matters are not happening, when they actually are. Some years ago, I was visiting a friend and she happened to have an Alexa machine, which I object to because I don't want to bark commands to a female voice. But my kid and I were playing and she was probably about 12 or so, and we said, oh, let's ask about racism. And so what do you think about racism, Alexa? So we got a reply, quite out of the box. It's a bad thing to discriminate against someone based on their skin color, blah, 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 blah. Fine. But then we asked Siri, and Siri said, I don't have an opinion on that. Someone had decided that this was too controversial to have an opinion on. Mm-hmm. And that is problematic in itself. And of course, translated to these much more powerful models, then we have that geometrical progression of the censorship plus the societies that is defending. So it is a big issue. We are trying to address that with our research. One of my students is working particularly on Bangladeshi English and artificial intelligence because of that problem of low resource languages. But it's something that we need to look into, that we need to focus on.
So I think what we're circling around is that quite often AI presents value neutral, always correct answers, which actually could be quite biased, but you don't know because it just tells you here's the answer, even when the answer might be wrong, or there might be another reason why we need to look deeper into the issue.
Yeah.
So a lot of what we have right now is very limited context, just like small context windows using different models. For example, I use a Google model with 2 million tokens versus the ChatGPT one that might have 12,000. So they're vastly different scales in terms of what it can understand. Mm-hmm. But since people have massive windows, what do you think of this idea of actually pulling in different kinds of information to generate something, if not new, then remixed and interesting? And the example that I always tell people these days is your students generating the ultimate Christmas movie. So maybe you could talk about that.
Yes, I have seen those. For example, when you feed AI different Hallmark movies and then it gets a script, is fascinating. It really is kind of funny for us to see the results of that. that type of production because it's generally quite laughable. And what he points out is all the things that are commonplaces or that are recurrent, but also some things get really out of control.
Right.
And it shows absolute ignorance of what you have asked it to do, that is to produce, I suppose, a script that would be regular and usable and productive. So we need still humans for that. But there is a lot of confusion in the models still. They are not as clever as we expect them to be. And as I said, well, we call it artificial intelligence, but again, as a humanist, to me, intelligence is way different from what these machines can produce at the moment.
So I'm curious, just from my own knowledge, people always talk about going and writing the great Canadian novel over the summer. Is there a winning formula inside that model of having, or that idea of having the right words in the right order, and that's what creates the great Canadian novel? Or is every book so different that it's impossible to replicate a really unique pattern?
That's a really good question, I think, because it's about so many different things. It's about a style, it's about context, it's about cultural context. So the Great Canadian Novel will, I think, not be written by AI. It will be written by a person, if it is not written yet. I actually love Margaret Atwood. I'm pretty sure that those are great Canadian novels. But if you wanted to have other things in your Great Canadian Novel, that will have to come from the experience of a human in Canada, in the context, and it has to be received in a particular way. Mm-hmm. So for a great novel to be recognized as such, it will have to be received by society in that way, and that requires, that's outside the realm of artificial intelligence. They can put a series of words in a particular order, but again, style is not about that. So it is a good imitator. So if you say to AI, please write to me this text, rewrite it in Jane Austen style, it has enough information to produce that. If you say write in Hemingway's style or write it in Ursula Le Guin's style, that it can do. It's very clever, very advanced at imitating those things, but it cannot produce its own style, and it certainly cannot understand the context, the social context, and I don't think it can reach the people in the same way that human can.
It's good to know my job is still safe for now.
Yes.
I build AI systems, so I'll probably be okay for a while. So let's go back to something else. It seems like over the past couple of years, there's been this very big hype cycle where everybody's talking about AI and who knows what's going to happen with the different technologies that are getting massive investment, frontier models that are $100 million to produce. It means that those AI models, the largest ones, are concentrated with some different companies. And although it's possible to build small AI, they can't compete with the breadth of knowledge that large models have. So what does this look like if you're interested in training your own model or coming up with something that's useful and different, but not necessarily buying into the largest models that are out there?
Well, it requires particular set of tools and people. We are actually working on something like that. So a lot of people in my subdiscipline, that is textual criticism, are trying to train models to encode text for us. And because there's a very limited vocabulary, it can be quite effective, I think. So that can be done. As long as you are working on a very, on a small enough set of things, then you will be able to produce good results. And we can think of something like optical character recognition a few years ago. I remember it was not very, very good initially in the 90s probably about recognizing or doing text correctly. But when you gave it numbers, it was much better because it's a limited or a smaller set of variables that you have. So again, the smaller your set, the smaller your ambition, then the easier it will be for ordinary people or extraordinary professors, maybe, if there are any, to do these things. But we can definitely not compete with things with like OpenAI and ChatGPT. I was reading recently, and I asked ChatGPT a couple of days ago in preparation for this, if he could tell me the number of parameters that these models were using. And of course, it refused to acknowledge the number of parameters for GPT-4. And I said, well, I heard that he said more than 1 trillion. I said, I heard that it's 1 per 76 trillion. Is that true? He said, well, I cannot tell you. I said, why can you not tell me this? And they said, well, it was because of the competitive edge that OpenAI needs, so it cannot release that information. I thought it was a very, very interesting conversation that I had. I never can manage to forget that it is a machine. So I don't know if it is passing the Turing test.
So let's take a step back. I think one of the biggest challenges is that we have these huge models now that are very expensive and really gigantic, and people are using them all the time. But we don't actually know the real cost of using them. They might charge us $20, but we may be spending $200 generating prompts and so on. There's also a huge energy cost, and artificial intelligence companies now are looking into building nuclear reactors to meet the demand of people developing cat pictures eating lasagnas, or lasagnas eating cats. I'm not sure what version it is. So my question is, what is the utility trade-off of, is this actually worth it? Or do we need a better way to make smarter people that can use this as a tool but use it smaller models or more efficiently? It seems like right now we're scaling larger and larger, but we're not really aware of the actual cost, both in terms of environmental, economic, and so on.
Well, we already know that there is a big environmental impact. So each time we ask questions of these models, we know that it is the equivalent of wasting something like a quarter of a liter of water. And that is, it has an impact on the environment and a series of other things. So I would be very careful how to use it. And I often tell people in my lab that joke about this because they still think it's a little bit funny. But I often tell them, don't ask dumb questions. Don't ask things that you know the answers to. And yeah, once in a while, we maybe kind of fool around with it. For example, we had a little contest a couple of weeks ago trying to get ChatGPT to tell us that we were wrong and who could do it faster, if we could, because it's extremely polite and it doesn't want to tell you that you're asking something that is completely ridiculous. But we need to be very aware of that. It is very important for all of us to know, and in that the opaqueness of these models and what is behind them is problematic too. We need to know that there is an impact and there is a cost to all of this. I always say that one of the biggest weaknesses in the Harry Potter novels is that magic cannot be free. Mm-hmm. Because if it is free, anyone can do it without any consequences. And what makes an adult book about magic is that you have to pay a price for it. Somewhere, something has to be taken away. And this is what is happening with AI. When we use it, each time we use it, something is being used up somewhere else that will not exist in the future. So we need to be quite careful about it.
So I guess our last and probably most important question is, what's the future of critical thinking?
Well, I think that it's pretty safe, I would say.
Okay.
I don't think that is a skill that these models have. They do have very fast thinking. That is really cool, but it's not critical thinking. The models are really clever when they are very limited. So, for example, the computers that can win at chess, like Deep Blue, when it was its time to shine, they were built on a very, very small scale universe that is chess set. And what was remarkable about them is that they can do what humans can do, but so much faster.
Right.
And in that, they can store a lot of information without studying it and things like that. But that is not critical thinking, right?
But in chess, there's a finite number of positions. Even though there's millions, assuming you could build a big enough, fast enough computer, it could figure out the answers.
Exactly.
But in English, there's an infinite number of possibilities. English is more like Go or Othello, where there's literally an endless way that you could put words together to make different things happen.
Yeah.
So right now we found this amazing software acceleration, but we're still very far away from the hardware that would turn English into chess.
Yeah, that is true. And in that I want to say that something that a colleague of mine said to me years ago. He said, well, you're approaching this problem as if it were chess, as if being intelligent, knowing the moves, knowing the different strategies was enough. But this is not chess, it's backgammon.
Right.
So backgammon, yes, you need a strategy, but you also need to be very lucky.
Right.
And to be in the right place at the right time. And that's what our intelligence is like. There is serendipity. There is communication, interaction between humans and society and the world. Different things happen all the time, and this is not true for AI. So I think that critical thinking will be fine for a long time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.